Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 73, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
And me, Ravi Abbott.
Now, this show is all about classic gaming, it's about old school video games, it's about computers and systems from back in the day. But this week, you're smelling rather retro, Ravi.
Oh, I've got Lynx Africa on.
I didn't even know you could still get Lynx Africa.
Oh, I saw it in the shop and, Alan Partridge just kind of thought, Africa, yeah.
Let me see I want to see the can. Pass it over.
There you go. Is
It's
it
a small
taking
one.
you back?
Is this one of those cans where it's got like the amount that a full can's got compressed?
Yeah, it's like a little tiny compressed Lynx Africa kind of style.
It never seems as much though, does it?
No.
I'm going to a little spray here.
Oh, the studio.
Yeah. Takes me back to like 1995.
Oh, kind of hair gel and under-18s discos.
Yeah, my Ben Sherman shirt on.
Cheers.
Well, it's nice to know that you keep every part of your life retro, Ravi.
Yeah, I'm just rocking it old school.
Now, if you are a new listener to the podcast, welcome along. Judging by the iTunes chart, I think we're number 3 last week.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much. And a lot of people kind of think that the iTunes chart is the number of listens, and it's not the number of listens, it's the number of new listeners that you're getting. So if we're higher in that chart, it means we're getting more people and the podcast is growing, so it's great.
Yeah, new people are coming through the door all the time, and obviously you can help us with that as well. Every thumb up that we get on a YouTube video, every comment, every review that we get on iTunes, which, this is why these are so important, because it helps us rise up the chart, and then obviously the show grows, it reaches out to new people, and the Retro Hour just keeps getting bigger and bigger, which is, really, really appreciated. So please do keep your comments, your thumbs up and your reviews and ratings and all that coming in. And of course, another way that you can support the Retro Hour podcast is by helping us out with the running of this show and leaving a donation. Now, we do have a little tip jar on the front page of our website, theretrohour.com. Oh, getting a nice hearty lung full of that Lynx Africa now, Ravi. But, we do have a little tip jar at theretrohour.com. If you want to put anything into there, it all goes back into the running of this show. We get people who just donate like €1 or something, and they're like, oh, that's all I could give you guys. And we're like, that's amazing, If everyone donated €1, we could do this full-time as our job, couldn't we?
And we both work kind of full-time jobs anyway. And having this kind of extra money really helps because we've got so much to do for the Retro Hour. We've got to, find guests. We've got to research kind of news stories and... Oh, it takes a lot of work, guys.
Yeah, and even just, the running costs of it as well. The studio that we're in now is a professional radio studio. We have SoundCloud premium subscriptions, so don't want to hammer the point home too much, but, any little donation that we get will go back into the running and just helps us keep doing the show week in, week out. So I want to say a massive thank you this week to everyone who's donated, and of course that does automatically qualify you for your place in the Retro Hour Hall of Fame. Now, thank you to the team, Rockarola,
Liam Clancy,
William Bateman,
and Lee Bestford,
who all made donations to the running of the Retro Hour podcast this week. It's massively appreciated. If you'd like to do the same, it'll take you a moment. All you've got to do is head to our website, theretrohour.com, with a PayPal link. Click it, put your email in, that's all it takes. And there is also a Bitcoin donation on there as well if you don't want to admit that you listen to the show. That's understandable. Now, of course, every week on the show, we do have a fascinating guest in the second half an hour. Now, this week, we've got Jeremy Thackery. Now, he's from the Centre for Computing History in Cambridge.
And, Cambridge, there's a lot of computing history in that town.
Yeah, we do say this in the interview with him, but really, it's kind of like the Silicon Valley of the UK, really, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. And it's still up to modern days, it is. And this is a really fascinating interview because he's talking about, you've probably got a big collection if you've been listening and maybe you wonder what to do with it. Well, they're actually displaying it and kind of getting people to come in, getting school kids involved. It's really good. And
this place, it is a pretty big museum. I know they've got aspirations for like a bigger space in the future because they've got that much. I think he tells us they've only got like 5% of their collection on display at any one time. So it proves just how much they've got there. And being based in Cambridge, like you said, companies like Sinclair, Acorn, were both based in Cambridge back in the day. So they've got a very strong kind of link to that history there as well. But also, unlike a lot of museums where you walk in and like everything's in glass boxes, here it's all hands-on. You can play with everything.
Yeah, it's all accessible. You can just sit down and get on your old school Beeb and just go mad.
Well, they've even got like an 80s classroom recreation full of BBC micros and stuff like that. So
a really interesting interview, this one.
So Jeremy Thackery, the assistant curator for the Centre of Computing History in Cambridge, is going to be our special guest on the Retro Hour in around 15 minutes from now. Now, before we get to that, there are some really cool stories that have been making the headlines in the world of retro this week, including a follow-up to one of my all-time favourite games. I can't believe we're getting a new Micro Machines game.
Where has this been, Dan? I've not seen this in any of the press. And, this looks really good. And who's it by?
Well, it's Stuart Campbell and Gavin Cooper. Obviously, Stuart, he's been in video games for years, journalist. He's worked at loads of companies and Codemasters, obviously. But I think he actually says in this interview with the successor.com, he says that, no matter what Codemaster games get released, the one people always ask about is Micro Machines.
I loved Micro Machines, and even to the point that every platform I'd play it on, it'd be Amiga, Mega Drive, but also they had the PlayStation version Micro Machines V3.
Yeah, the kind of 3D-ish one on it.
Yeah, that was really good as well, and it's kind of disappeared. Like, where did it go? It just went.
There were I know on the PS2 there was a Micro Machines game, but it wasn't really in the flavour of the original. So really what, looking at this game and the gameplay, it's obviously modern graphics, but it's got a lot of kind of throwback to the 80s and 90s in there as well. There's a couple of courses where you're driving along and hungry hippos try to eat you.
Yeah, they're saying G.I. Joe's involved in there, so they've got all of the kind of old Hasbro branded stuff in there as well. But it's really interactive. Micro Machines always had that feel of you're on a table or you're on a pool table or you're in someone's house. But now with the 3D graphics and kind of effects you can do with dynamic lighting, you can make it a much more exciting course, and you can have, water effects splashing everywhere and sparks and all this kind of stuff to avoid.
Well, we've always said, because whenever we have gaming nights and that, Micro Machines always comes out on an Amiga, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
But we've always said, wouldn't it be cool to play it online? And obviously this is coming out on the PS4, Xbox One and PC. So finally, you'll be able to play Micro Machines, a modern version of it, online with anyone, anywhere in the world, which it's always been a dream of mine, actually, to be able to sit down and play Micro Machines around the world. Dude, I'm going to spend so much time on this game when it comes out.
And they're saying, it's going to be a budget release as well. So it's going to be £20, and it's coming out for the Xbox One, PS4 and PC. So, it's going to be a great load of titles. I'm definitely going to get it on the PC and be playing Dan all the time.
Oh, this does look amazing. I've got to say, there are some, franchises from your childhood when they get updated, you're always a bit but when I watch this, no doubts in my mind, this is going to be absolutely epic.
And with Stuart Campbell behind it as well, it really gives it some credentials, in our mind.
Absolutely, being a guy who was involved in these classic games first time round, he's obviously got, you'd imagine, quite a high threshold for quality as well, so... Yeah. He was a games reviewer. He never went easy on games back in Amiga Power. So you think if anyone's going to, make sure the game's good, it's Stuart. So if you want to see the trailer, actually, we'll put that on our Facebook page and also in our show notes at theretrohour.com. Now, when you think of video games like, Doom or Duke Nukem 3D, for example, these are games that have been, around for 20 years now at least.
Yeah, Mortal Kombat as well and all the kind of beat-em-ups.
A lot of the time you'll play a game right through, but you won't think about certain things in there that might help you out, like sound effects, or maybe just certain doors opening and hearing that kind of thing, or maybe vibrations. But could you ever imagine playing something like Doom without looking at the screen?
Well, there's a guy, and he does, and he's got an amazing little documentary about it. It's called Gaming Through New Eyes. It's a short documentary, and it's won lots of prizes, actually, worldwide. And this is on Kotaku, and they're basically saying... He started playing Mortal Kombat originally. This guy's completely blind. And he'd get the moves and he'd kind of get the feel of the sound. And let's just play the clip and you'll kind of hear what he's talking about.
Okay, this is a little clip from the middle. It's like a 90-minute video. About halfway through, this is a section where he's playing Doom. And bearing in mind, this guy was born with a condition that means he's got no eyeballs, so he can't see a thing.
Like the old classics, Doom and Duke Nukem, because I love the sound effects of the monsters, and I also enjoyed seeing how many monsters I can kill in one shot with the different weapons. Because I'm blind, I can't access all the health packs and all the armour, so I use God mode so that I can actually enjoy the maps. I also use a cheat where I can go through the walls because I can't find all the keys to the doors. And because I can't complete all maps, I also use a level select cheat as well.
What really does make you think is, every kind of audio cue in these games is so important to how he plays them. And often audio, I mean, we've done shows about music and that kind of stuff before, but it's often kind of forgotten. I mean, people always talk about old graphics and that kind of thing. But even like, sound effects on a menu, when you're selecting something and you press the down cursor, to him...
having different noises for each individual part. And, having physical controls as well, because, a lot of the tablet stuff, you may not be able to do that if you can't actually see where the inputs are. But, holding a joypad or having your keyboard and mouse could be really good. But also he's saying, the sense of achievement that he gets from this. He spent 8 weeks trying to beat one of the bosses in FFX. And that's amazing. Once he did that, he was, over the moon. Right?
I'm looking at, he plays Doom better than me, to be fair. It's like, it's amazing that he manages to do this. What an achievement. It just makes you think that maybe, more game developers should maybe think about those with kind of, accessibility kind of needs, or the fact that I imagine a lot of developers looked at that and they thought they just throw sound effects in and stuff because it's just part of the game. But it really means, this is the only way that he sees these games.
Well, a lot of the older games kind of were a lot more usable by people with accessibility problems. And we've talked about this previously on the show, how like older computer systems would actually support people a lot more than they do nowadays. And it's quite sad, actually, because they have so much new technology and ability to help people and make custom controllers and stuff. And it's all really kind of just built for people with all the sensors.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, this documentary is definitely worth a watch because, again, it's like you said, it's seeing a different angle of these games that kind of you thought you knew inside out, and just seeing how someone plays them so differently to how we do is, I think, a huge achievement. So if you want to watch that video, we'll put it in our show notes at theretrohour.com. Now, this is quite an interesting list on Lifehacker, because we've got loads of old consoles and computers and stuff lying around, Ravi, and cupboards and everywhere we can fit them in our houses.
I'm constantly trying to fix them and breathe new life into these machines. That's all I do.
Well, this is a list on Lifehacker. Top 10 ways to breathe new life into an old gaming console. Now, some of these are quite common sense, you'd imagine, but it's good to be reminded of them now and then. The first one on the list is make sure you have it set up in the best way possible. And the show, a really good example here. And this is someone with an Xbox 360 that is notoriously a system that is, prone to overheating. And they've got like a Sky satellite box perched on top of it and like a DVD player on top of that as well. Blocking the air vents and stuff like that is never a good idea. So it's worth having them all set up nice and proper. But also, they mention stuff like, taking apart the controllers and cleaning up like those sticky, grimy thumbsticks and buttons that stick down and that kind of thing.
But also, I think that making sure it's set up in the best way possible also would be like the video output. So like, Joe, we went round to your house and you had aerial plugs on everything and you're trying to tune in your TVs.
RF, didn't they? Yeah, Joe, come on, Joe.
Yeah, and we're saying, look, you can get an adapter for this and have it coming straight out RGB looking beautiful. And a lot of people haven't done that. Like Dreamcasts, they've got some amazing adapters. So you can get up to like, I think 480i.
Yeah, VGA output, yeah.
Yeah. And that's supported by a lot of games. So, I think it's really important to have the best quality display.
Well, even on PlayStation 2 and original Xbox, you can use component cables. Original Xbox can do like 720p.
Yeah.
So it's like really nuts, you know what I mean? So that is a really good point, getting cables. Because, I mean, for most systems, you can get good quality video cables off eBay for like tenner. Not very much, unless you want one for a GameCube. For some reason, they're really expensive if you want, like, component for them. The next one is ditch the new release train and clear out that last-gen backlog. Now, this is really true because, especially now, where we're getting to, the stage where, the current-gen consoles have been out for a few years now. They're kind of even getting a refresh. But if you go to shops like CEX and that kind of thing, you can buy Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 games for, like, £5.
Yeah, and you can get some really good titles. It's just that there's so many of them that you need to know what you're looking for. But also, you could have missed a hell of a lot of good ones. So.
Yeah. Well, I was at Revival a couple of weeks ago, and there, I mean, a lot of stores were selling PS2 games off. There was actually one guy in the middle who kind of had a bit of a fire sale on the Saturday, and he said, right, for now, everything's £1. Later on, we went back and he had a 10p box, just full of PlayStation 2 titles.
Oh, wow.
And, there was some crap there. Samantha actually bought a few of them. She bought Scooby-Doo.
Oh, cool.
One called Sitting Duck that I'd never heard of before.
Never heard of that.
Looked a bit like an open world simulator with a duck. So, but for 10p, you might find a hidden gem in there. You imagine in 10, 20 years' time, PS2 games are probably going to be worth quite a lot more. So it is a good time to get caught up on those games that you maybe missed from the last gen. The next one is use it as a dedicated media center or set-top box. Now, obviously, Kodi was originally on the Xbox, wasn't it? XBMC?
Xbox Media Center, yeah, I remember that. That was one of the first versions, and kind of you could, watch old MP3s and old MP4s on there. It was really good fun. But yeah, you can kind of convert something new. But actually, I don't think this one's that relevant because a lot of consoles now are media centers.
Yeah, they got it built in. But I mean, I've actually thought this because I set like a Kodi box up in my bedroom and I went through, I originally had an Apple TV that wouldn't stream all my stuff. I bought like a Roku, and again, that was a bit slow. And originally I thought, why don't I just put an Xbox 360 in there? Because it's got like Netflix and everything on it.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
like you can get them for like 70 quid.
The only problem is the noise.
Yeah.
And I've got this one called BB2 Pro, which is 60 quid, and it's 8 cores.
Okay.
And does like 4K content and everything, and that's just a little Android box. Fantastic.
I mean, yeah, it's probably not worth buying one outright, but if you've got like, maybe a PS3 in the cupboard that's not doing anything, you can do YouTube, Netflix,
totally.
iPlayer and all that's on there as well, so it's a good way
I could put RetroArch on that as well and play some old games.
Well, the next one is actually saying install new firmware. Now, the original Xbox, I've got one that's got CoinOps 7 on there, which is like every arcade game you could ever imagine.
Wow.
And it plays them all amazingly.
And that's just through a strange firmware update, and then you can install all of these media center and other stuff on there.
Kind of following on from that, turn it into an arcade cabinet.
Yeah, you can turn it into an old school gaming cab, but also you could probably hook it up to a CRT TV and have it in there with the scan lines, go old school. I've seen those giant game controllers that you can get for arcade cabinets and then wire them all up to your machine, and you've got, joystick and proper fire buttons.
That's the thing, I mean, because a lot of these kind of older systems, they are powerful enough to emulate old arcade machines, but also they've got the standard def outputs. So you don't have to use HDMI, you can actually hook them up to a CRT, like you said. And, a friend of mine's actually got a driving rig, all powered by an Xbox 360. And he's got like an arcade wheel and it's in like an arcade box.
In his living room, is it?
Kind of in his man den upstairs, but I think he'd like it in the living room if he had a chance. Set up an arcade room with stations for your old consoles. Now, our buddy Marvin actually came to visit us in Nottingham, didn't he, the other week?
Oh, yeah, that was really nice. Came all the way over from the Netherlands.
Yeah, and he was doing a little pickup over in Birmingham. But he picks up kind of these kind of retro stuff all the time. We tried to get out of him exactly where he finds his stuff, but we didn't quite get the full story, I don't think.
No, he just pulled up to my house with a van, and I opened the boot, and it was like, oh, God, 40 boxes in there. God, Apple Lisa, there was quite a few nice things in there.
Well, some stuff he gets, I actually saw he had the original PlayStation 2, cabinets you used to see like in-store displays.
Oh, like the vendor display booths, yeah.
I think independent shops are probably more likely to maybe have them still out the back or, in storage. They might sell them to, or maybe you'll find them in like, junk shops or whatever. But setting those up in your retro gaming room always looks incredibly cool, I think, doesn't it? And number 4 on the list, use the parts for other projects. Now, I never really advocate, ripping apart a console that was working, but if you got a broken one...
Hey, you ripped my laser out of the PlayStation, didn't you?
That was one of the small PlayStations to make an original fat PlayStation 1 work, Ravi.
Yeah,
that was a worthwhile. That was a
perfect.
worthwhile sacrifice.
It was.
Or you could just stuff a Raspberry Pi in the case.
Yeah,
if
true.
You've got a broken machine. If you are Ben Heck, you can make it into a portable.
Yeah, I'm attempting a portable Amiga 600, but I don't think it's going to happen. I'm hoping that Ben just does it and I don't have to.
But if you've got skills, I mean, having like an Xbox 360, laptop almost would be pretty cool.
That's pretty cool. Well, even those PlayStation 1s you're on about, they were little portable ones. You could just probably shove a lithium-ion battery on there and have the PS1 screen.
You could buy a screen for it, couldn't you?
Yeah.
A little portable PlayStation there. Get most of the money back if you do sell it. Now, this kind of depends on what kind of system you've got, I think.
On timing.
Yeah.
That's the key.
If you sell, a Super Nintendo, you probably get back what you paid for it now.
Yeah.
If you sold an Xbox 360, probably not.
Yeah, probably get about £12 nowadays.
Yeah, don't sell them in CEX. So if you want to check out this full list, it's worth a read. We'll put that in our show notes at theretrohour.com. Now, do you remember Parappa the Rapper?
Kick, punch, it's all in the mind. Yeah, I remember that.
You played it before.
Oh, yeah, I still know all the lyrics.
I remember my brother having that when we first got a PlayStation. Probably one of the first PS1 games I ever played, Parappa the Rapper.
Yeah, it was wicked. It was like a beat game, but before Guitar Hero, wasn't it? So you were kind of just hitting on the beat and trying to get the timing right. And if you didn't, you get scolded by an onion.
Yeah, onion head dude. Yeah, he's a bit weird. Wasn't he?
Yeah.
It was a very surreal game, actually, wasn't it, looking back?
Yeah, because it was like this 2D looking graphics, and then they kind of turn. And
Yeah,
it'd be like cardboard, wouldn't it?
paper cutouts.
Yeah.
It was very cool. But again, I mean, it was kind of like, I think that kind of era of gaming, you know, it was before like all the massive AAA studios got involved, and it probably was a bit more experimental. I mean, you kind of get that again with the indie scene now, but for years you didn't.
Yeah, it kind of seemed like an indie game, actually. You're right.
Well, now there is a spiritual successor to Parappa the Rapper,
Oh, cool.
and this is called Project Rap Rabbit.
Oh, Rap Rabbit. So what was Parappa? I'm not sure even what kind of creature he was, but this guy's
Dog or something?
Yeah.
I have no idea what he was, actually. I'm sure someone will tell us on Twitter. They normally do.
Yeah.
But this is a new game that's coming out, and apparently it kind of plays quite like Parappa the Rapper, insofar as, you know, like you said, it's kind of like hitting the buttons in time to the music and the lyrics and all that kind of thing as well. But this is just launched on Kickstarter, and it's going to be released on the PlayStation 4 and the PC initially. Now, they're looking to raise about $1.1 million, which some people have been saying that's quite a lot of money for it. But looking at this is like, you know, pretty much a full-on modern generation game. You know what I mean? It's not like a small, like, couple of level indie game. It's actually a full-on commercial release.
I think if they get it out, if they get word out enough, they will get it, because there's been much, much bigger projects on Kickstarter.
Exactly. Well, this is running on Kickstarter at the moment, and it's actually doing really well at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's still got 28 days to go at the time of recording this, and thereafter, I mean, just to get this out the door, in terms of pounds, £855,000, and bearing in mind this has only been running a couple of days, it's already raised $115,000.
And by the time this episode comes out, it's probably going to be a lot more.
But I think the thing is with this, I mean, anyone who really wants to see this game should back these projects, because we've seen them in the past where they kind of come and go, and that's, you know, they never see the light of day. But I mean, there are some kind of stretch goals in here as well. Now, initially they're saying it's only going to come out on the PS4 and their PC. I'm not exactly sure why an Xbox One versions are not included in that, because it normally would be, I think, wouldn't you? But they reckon if they get to 1.5 million, there's going to be a Nintendo Switch edition as well.
Maybe they have to pay some kind of licensing or something to get onto the Switch. Or
Yeah,
Xbox,
the Switch, I know you need like a dev kit for it, which, you know, I imagine £1 million would probably cover one of those. But I think it's really cool to see that kind of game coming back, and also in such a big way as well.
Yeah, no, it looks great. These kind of rap rhythmic beat games. Yeah, they're a lost genre.
Well, let's see a little bit of the music on it.
Oh, that's very Parappa style.
Yeah, it does sound old school, doesn't it?
Yeah. And I remember the beats were always really cool on Parappa as well.
Yeah, you'd sometimes just listen to music on that game, wouldn't you, as well, just to put it on to hear the tunes.
And it was always like little break beats, wasn't it? Hip-hop style kind of breaks.
He was a cool guy, wasn't he? And, you know,
he was
Rap Rabbit
cool.
looks pretty good as well, actually, I've got to say. And it's good to see, you know, this is going to kind of introduce that style of game to like a new generation of gamers as well. So,
Hopefully, yeah.
Yeah, if you want to check out the trailer and back the Kickstarter, we'll put that in this week's show notes at theretrohour.com. Right then, thank you for checking out episode number 73. The podcast will be out again next Friday. Your little treat before the weekend. Please do keep your reviews coming in on iTunes, your thumbs up on YouTube, your comments.
Your tweets.
Yeah, well, we are on obviously all of your social media networks. We always appreciate a follow. You can find all our links at theretrohour.com. And let's get into this week's special guest, all about the Centre for Computing History in Cambridge, with Jeremy Thackery. And we'll see you next week.
Ciao.
You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and it's time to welcome this week's very special guest, Jeremy Thackery from the Centre for Computing History. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me on.
No problem at all. Now, what is it you actually do at the centre?
Okay, so I'm the assistant curator at the museum. I'd say half of my job is to do with trying to manage our collection. We've got an awful lot of stuff. So it's kind of getting the museum to the point where we're sort of competing with longer, well-established museums and so on. But then the other half of it is, because we're a small team, we all pitch in with just about everything. So yeah, managing the events that we do, so gaming nights and so on. Just dealing with visitors all the time, and doing podcasts every now and then. So yeah, it's a pretty varied job.
Well, what's kind of your background then? Why did you start with computers? What about your own personal interest?
It was a bit of an amazing job opportunity for me, this one, because I started out when I was trying to find something to do with myself, actually doing a bit of video game journalism online. I did lots of reviews and things like that for various websites. And it never quite took off in a way that I was sort of satisfied with. And one of my other interests was museums and heritage. So I did some volunteering at some much more typical museums, and did a qualification in it, and then a job came up which combined computing, technology, gaming, and museums. You don't see those very often. And that's how I ended up where I am today.
Well, how did the idea of the centre start?
It was about, I think we're just over 10 years old now in terms of when the whole project got going. We started out of a private collection about 10 years ago. The director of the museum isn't a museums person by trade. He's a software developer. And he was a collector like any other. And as so often happens with collections, at some point, the collector has to decide what to do when it gets pretty big. And some people decide to downsize, to get out of the game. But he decided to be ambitious and try and make it into a public collection. And since then, we've done various different things. There was a period where it was kind of just taking machines out to special events and doing all sorts of other things. But about a little bit under 4 years ago now, we managed to get our first proper home base in Cambridge. And now we've got our own building for exhibits. We're able to collect a lot more stuff. And we're well on the way to being a pretty established part of the museum world, especially in Cambridge.
Well, you made an interesting point there about, kind of collecting being addictive. I mean, Ravi and I can vouch for that. We keep buying more systems all the time. I mean, are you a collector yourself? Do you have a personal collection at home?
Probably. Well, I've got a few. It's mostly just games and software titles and a few other things. My era where I was really growing up and gaming for the first time was kind of mid to late 90s. Mm-hmm. I was a big fan of RPGs, and I do quite like a big boxed copy of Baldur's Gate that I've got here, which is one of the things I'm really happy to have, with all the right innards and inserts inside it, and all the different 5 CDs to play the thing, and all the maps and all the shortcut guides on paper and the big manuals. And that's one of the things we actually do at the museum. Is there are lots of projects out there preserving code, taking source code off tapes and preserving that. But there's also something about having the product. We collect the physical item as well. So the product, the box with all the right inserts and manuals, just as you would have got it when you bought it off the shop shelf in the 80s or the 90s or the 70s for some of the oldest stuff that we've got. Yeah.
Do you get donations? And if you do they kind of affect the way you're going to create something? Like, oh, we've suddenly got a load of, Commodore stuff, or we've suddenly got a load of Acorn stuff.
They can do, yeah. We've got to the point now where we've gotten we tend to have multiple copies of most of the sort of common machines of the home computing era. So Acorn and Sinclair, naturally, we have a lot of that sort of stuff because they were Cambridge based. So much. There are so many of those machines still in people's attics and garages that have been just sat there for the last 30 years in this part of the country, and we happen to be a good nearby place to take it to. But we do occasionally have some moments, where we get a fantastic offer out of the blue, and we decide to build a display around that particular item. It doesn't tend to be the kind of home computers anymore. It tends to be the weirder, rarer stuff. Someone donated a analog computer from supposedly from a Lancaster bomber in the Second World War, which would have been used for targeting bombing runs, essentially. Yeah. And we got, when we've been dealing with 80s micros and all this consumer merchandise so much, to get an object like that was absolutely fantastic. So we're going to try and build that into our displays as well. But on the idea of donations generally, the museum really we've run off donations. There are a few things where we've specifically gone out and sought them out and made some purchases, but for the most part, we rely on what people have brought to us over the years.
Do you ever get bogged down with kind of donations, repairing it and processing it and getting it ready for the museum?
Oh, yes, absolutely. One of the trickiest things we've found in the last few years, actually, is making that transition from we'll take absolutely anything and we'll dig through it and we'll find all the good stuff that we want for the collection, to picking and choosing before they even bring it to the museum, because storage now has become a really tricky question for us. We've expanded recently. We've got more storage buildings. It's always a question for every museum, really, storage. I've never worked in one where everyone is happy with the amount of spare room they've got to put stuff in. So it does take a lot of time to do it, but that's part of what you do in Heritage. You're not just collecting these things to have them and to keep them in a back room locked away. You're having them to to really get them back out there and show them to people. So you need to preserve them properly, keep them properly catalogued, and it adds up, but it is all worth it in the end.
Ravi made an interesting point there, actually, about, like the maintenance of these machines. I imagine, especially with the more rare things, I mean, tracking down the source code for like a Lancaster bomber onboard computer must be, how do you find this stuff?
Yeah, do you have to get any specialists in or anything?
We have done from every now and then, yeah. Once computer architecture hits the kind of home computer era, so once we get to the 80s, it becomes a bit more standardized. So you don't necessarily, for lots of the common home machines, have to have an expert on each individual one. But that said, when those guys do come along who have a real intense interest in particular types of machine, they can make them do amazing new things. It's one thing getting, I don't know, when a BBC Micro pops its capacitors, it's one thing swapping those around. But last week we had a big Acorn event, and you should see what some of the guys there were able to do with with a BBC Micro or with any of the Acorn range. Same for any of the home computers or games consoles of that era. If you have someone who really knows their stuff, they can bring these objects to life in a way that most kind of technicians really can't. But we are lucky at the museum. We've got a very good team of volunteers who are there all hours of the day and night. During the day, they'll be sticking screwdrivers and things and fixing machines up for us, and in the evening they'll be helping to run our events. So they're a terrific bunch, and we really couldn't do without them.
Well, let's talk a bit about Cambridge, because I mean, really, back in the 80s, it was kind of like the Silicon Valley of Britain, really, wasn't it? It was, with companies like Acorn and Sinclair, and a lot of people's attention would have been drawn to it with the Micro Men movie a few years ago as well, obviously. Do you kind of get, is there much of a connection between, people that used to work at these companies that's maybe pop in from time to time? Or
there is, absolutely. I mean, the main legacy of that era now is ARM in Cambridge, who spun out of Acorn. We still get plenty of guys coming in from there, having a look around the place, and they're one of our sponsors as well, actually. So plenty of people from there coming in. We get people who will appear completely innocuous when they walk in, just like any other visitor, and then they'll just name drop Life Sinclair or any of the other famous figures from that era and say, oh yeah, I worked with them back in the day, and it's terrific to see their stuff on display again. But yeah, it really has come to light again. I mean, you talk about Micro Men. It was fun hearing about that, because we actually supplied all the gear for that film.
Oh wow!
In one of the scenes, our director is in there playing one of the Acorn developers in the background. So I think that was a dream come true for him, really.
So what's really the goal of the centre then? What are your aims?
The aim is to be kind of a national centre for computing and the history of computing, really. And there are plenty of similar museums cropping up around the country at the moment. I think the initial aim of all of them is often just we have all this great old stuff, we're going to show it off to people. That's how so many museums start, and ours was no different. But kind of the grand ambitions, if you like, are to be a genuine centre for research into the history of computing. I hope in future that we branch out more into preserving code as well, because there are lots of mainstream museums actually who are now collecting source code, trying to get it direct from developers to help preserve this stuff for the future. So that's one of the things we'd love to do, and we're just looking to increase the collection, increase the number of visitors coming in through the door all the time as well. But yeah, so lots of grand ambitions, definitely.
What's the kind of age range that you get there? The average age, or is it just a big mix?
It is pretty mixed, actually. Yeah, I'd say we during the week we have a lot of school groups coming in, and the typical ages for those are kind of Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 3. So about 8 or 9 years old up to kind of 15 or 16. It's kind of our main range for schools. But in terms of general visitors, we tend to get a lot of families coming in because we tell the history at the museum, but it's been one of our guiding principles from the start that we try to have as much of the stuff switched on as possible for visitors just to have a go with, whether that's games consoles or micros or some of the more serious stuff as well. And that does go down well with the family audience, because we often get lots of parents who are, growing up in the 70s or the 80s, and they can kind of do our job for us in many ways when they're talking to their kids. They can interpret all of these objects. They can say to them, this is what this was for. I used one of these when I was your age. So you do get a really nice atmosphere with all the families. But yeah, we get lots of quite a lot of older visitors coming in as well, often who will have been involved in the industry, and plenty more besides as well. So it's a real mix, yeah.
Well, what can people expect when they visit the museum then? What kind of stuff have you got on display?
The broad part of the history at the museum tends to cover the home computing era. We do have stuff that predates that. We go back to kind of the 1960s and 1950s with our collections, so we can demonstrate punch tape running through 1960s machines and so on. Then we have a whole area full of games consoles, going from Pong consoles in the 70s. I think the last one on our display is the GameCube at the moment. Maybe in a few years' time we'll add the next generation of consoles onto that list. And then we've got 80s micros as well, so everything from Acorn Atoms and Electrons up to sort of the Amiga era and later PCs as well. So there's all sorts to come and use, really, and you can come along just to have a play with things, to play all the games and play on the arcade machines we've got. We have coding worksheets to help people who've never done any coding before to get a little start on that. And probably the display we're most proud of actually recently is, or our newest object, is a machine called the Mega Processor, which you may well have heard of. It's become it's been doing the rounds on the internet. It's a homebrew project here in Cambridge. One person decided to build a processor at home on a huge scale. It's 10 meters long, 2 meters tall, and it basically blows up the processes going on inside a CPU on an enormous scale with loads of blinking LEDs. And it's a terrific way of showing just what's going on, just how much power there is in any old common smartphone, tablet, or laptop today.
And that was all hand built, wasn't it? That Mega Processor.
Yes, it was. Yeah. It's a mad project. It's an extraordinary thing. You can only give credit to James who built it, but all built by hand. I think my favourite stat is there's something like 250,000 individual solder joints on the machine. So it's an insane creation, and now it sits in our front room. It's one of the first things you see when you come in.
Well, in terms of other systems that you've got, I mean, I imagine they come from various sources, but I mean, where do you tend to get your machines and your software from then?
As I say, for the most part, it's just people have them still lying around in attics and in garages, and it's so common that people come to us and say, I'm moving out or I'm downsizing and I've found these things. Do you want them? If not, then I'm going to have to chuck them in the skip, really. I mean, we are a museum. We're preserving this stuff for the future, but equally we're not dealing with Ming vases or old master paintings. We're dealing with consumer technology. There's a lot of it around. The challenge isn't so much preserving each last individual object. It's conveying to future generations what this stuff was for. So yeah, that's really what we try and do. But donations come from everywhere, really, but most often it's just everyday people who've bought a home computer 30 years ago and it's been gathering dust for 20 years. Because that's where we tend to get most of our stuff from.
What kind of rare systems have you got there? Because I did read that you guys have got, is it the only working, or it may not be working anymore, Acorn Phoebe?
We did have the only working Acorn Phoebe, yes, and then it stopped working. We're trying to get that one fixed at the moment. But we've got plenty of other stuff as well, quite good things in the collection. And I think one of the favourites on gaming nights, obviously, is things like Virtual Boys often are very well received by visitors, especially with VR having such a comeback in the last few years. Explaining to young kids that this is nothing new is often quite fun when you bring out the Virtual Boy and show them something like that. But I suppose at the moment we're not so much focusing on the rarer sort of home computers, although they are great to have. What we really want to try and find now is weird computing ephemera, so strange different objects rather than kind of core systems and so on. We'd really love to have those objects which tell different stories about the history of computing. So things that what we've tried to do over the years actually is progress from we do like telling the technical stories of things, how the technology has changed, but also we want to try and tell how computers have impacted on our lives. So we're trying to collect more objects that really tell that story. I think one of the interesting things that came through recently was some very, very early bank cards from the 1960s. I mean, if you think about how computers have revolutionized the way we handle our money, that's kind of a genesis in many ways, having something like this piece of paper with some holes punched in it, and that's your bank card from the 1960s. So we have plenty of those rare systems which have kind of taken on a lot of prominence in the retro community. And we're very, very happy to show all that stuff up at the museum, but we do love showing things that people have never thought of before as well, like those bank cards, like the computer from the Lancaster bomber and like all sorts of stuff besides, as well as things like the Phoebe that you mentioned. Yeah.
I think I actually saw the Phoebe at, it was called Silicon Dreams, a festival ages ago. I don't know if it was you guys. It must have been. But it's a beautiful machine.
Yellow case.
Yeah.
Yellow case, later development for Acorn, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Yeah, it was essentially the RISC PC2 was the Phoebe, and it was just almost ready to roll when Acorn decided that home computer production was no longer for them, and that's when they rebranded and Acorn as we knew it was no more really. So it's one of those strange machines that almost made it out and has now taken on a wholly different kind of wholly different story because it never quite made it to market. Yeah,
I remember them selling because you're right, it was that close to being released. That actually made all the cases, and there were, you could buy like hundreds of Phoebe cases on eBay for several years.
Yeah, it was quite funny actually. Last week we held a big Acorn event, and I remember walking in through the doors to the museum to start work in the morning, and there was a Phoebe just sat there at the front desk. And part of me was going, "Oh, is that there's another one? Someone donated this," but it was just a case, not one of the guys that brought it along, and ours, I was assured, was elsewhere in the museum. So yeah, it's got a very interesting history, that object, but it is a nice thing to look at. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned the Acorn exhibition that you had. It was Acorn World, wasn't it? And I mean, obviously, I imagine you must be quite closely related to the Acorn community, then, being based in Cambridge. And I know you've even got have you got an 80s classroom with the BBC Micros set up there?
We do, yeah. We still do. One of the workshops we run for schools is coding as it would have been done in schools in 1984. Oh, wow. We teach BBC Basic on the Beebs, which it's a great thing to do because even though the programming language might not be practically useful today, the logic and the way of thinking in that logical way is still taught brilliantly by it. It's still a great tool for teaching that way of thinking. So yeah, we've got a lot of Acorn stuff here as well. The event was really good. We did it in conjunction with ABUG, the Acorn and BBC Use group, on the Stardot forums, and they came in, they took over our classroom, and they had all sorts of retro projects in there, all their homebrew things, which making Beebs do things that no one would have dreamt they could be able to do in the 80s. And then we had a big history display as well with the Phoebe, as well as lots of other interesting objects as well. We recently acquired actually from Steve Ferber, who's he's professor of computing at Manchester University now. He was one of the key designers on the BBC Micro and of the ARM chip. He has very kindly donated what's essentially the prototype to the BBC Micro. It was his own home-built computer, which went on to become Acorn's Proton.
Wow. Which
then went on to become the BBC Micro. So it's kind of the prototype of the prototype, really, and we had that out on display as well. So yeah, it was a really good event.
Well, I think back to my school days, with the BBC Micros and the Acorn Archimedes. I remember using stuff like Logo, and we had like a little robot turtle that you could control, and yes. There were great machines for we'd like robotic arms and that kind of thing as well. They really kind of encouraged learning those machines.
Yeah, they really were. It's strange talking to visitors about the change in education in computing, because we talk so much about this 80s period where computers were the next big thing. They were going to change everyone's lives. The government came in and funded computing in a big way. Schools pushed coding. And by the time you get to the 90s and later on, when, there was no computing, of course, it was all IT, and it was essentially how do you do word processing and how do you use a spreadsheet. And there was nothing beyond that. If you wanted to do anything that involved coding, let alone hardware, then you'd be waiting until you were 17 or 18 years old, and you decided to take it up from that. So education has changed massively in the computing world. It's kind of gone back and forth from purely software-based up to only using applications, and now it's come back to actually software and hardware again, which is fantastic to see.
And I think anyone, of like in the 30s and 40s, when they actually see a BBC Micro, because they were in every single school, and the Acorn Archimedes after that, I imagine it just kind of evokes memories that maybe they haven't thought of for years.
Yeah, it really does. It's fascinating seeing kind of a sort of muscle memory reappearing when people come to the museum. They'll sit down in front of a keyboard that they won't have sat in front of for 30 years, and suddenly little bits of code will come back to them. they'll find themselves typing 10 print hello world, 20 go to 10 before they've even realized that they're doing it, which is really interesting to see. But probably one of the comments we actually get most when people come into the 80s classroom is they'll say, yeah, it's great, you've got lots of BBCs, but there weren't nearly as many as this in my school, because we have, we'll have 15 or 16 of them in there when we've got a full school group. Whereas in an 80s classroom, you might be lucky if you had more than 2 or 3 in your school, maybe.
I think in the late 80s we had like 4, I think, yeah. And like we used to lock them in an iron safe overnight. I used to set them up and then set them up in the mornings and stuff. So.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's I think just having those exhibitions must take a lot of work as well. I mean, what are kind of the exhibitions you've been most proud of then?
I think we're really proud of that we do have the Mega Processor now in the front room. It's just such a fantastic tool for education, as well as just being really visually arresting when you walk in. There's nothing like walking through the door and seeing a massive wall of 20,000 LEDs flashing at you. But yeah, the Acorn World event last year was really good to do. Other fun ones we've done. We did one at the beginning of last year, beginning of 2016, with Ashens. Yeah. He released Terrible Old Games You've Probably Never Heard Of, one of his Kickstarted books, and we held an event with him called Terrible Old Games Day, where we were just celebrating these awful games, and we got them out for people to actually play and experience. So that was a lot of fun. But yeah, we do all sorts of other events too. Our retro gaming nights are probably the biggest event we do. We open late and we just get out lots more games from our archive, some of the rarer stuff too. So yeah, we do lots of things that point towards the retro community and get them in, but we're also trying to do more events that get a kind of general audience into the museum as well. People who don't know much about technology or feel that it's not for them. We're trying to cover them with more exhibitions as well. So we've got upcoming exhibitions on cybersecurity, on women in computing, on various other topics as well. So yeah, we're really trying to broaden that audience. Yeah.
Do you get any celebrity visitors, or maybe some unannounced celebrity visitors?
Well, I'm not sure about celebrities, but every so often you'll see a big shot in the computing world coming through the door, and we have to sort of go, oh, was that? Yes, it was. Yeah.
There are celebrities.
Yes, I suppose. Yeah. Who have we had in? So Clive Sinclair came along to a Sinclair Day we did back in 2014. We've done interviews with various people as well. Chris Curry, who's obviously one of the founders of Acorn. Eben Upson, who's leading the Raspberry Pi Foundation at the moment. He actually came along to Acorn Day. It was fantastic. I was sat there at the front desk, and he comes in with a pram and sits down, and I had to sort of do a double take and go, yes, that is Eben Upton. Just coming in like any other visitor, sitting down at the cafe and having a look at the exhibits. So yeah, we do get those from time to time, and we're doing more and more stuff with YouTubers and people like that as well. So yeah, it's quite nice seeing who comes along.
Well, your YouTube channel is really good, and I mean, we'll put a link in our show notes if people haven't checked it out before. I mean, I was watching your the interview you did with Eben actually on your channel, and it's really cool. He sit there with an Amiga 600, and he's talking about the background on that machine. Then he's got like the prototype documents for the original Raspberry Pi as well. Yeah,
the video projects are something we try to do a lot of. I think the project ended last summer. Actually, we had money from the Heritage Lottery Fund for a specific video project to try and gather these interviews from sort of the big names in computing in this part of the country, and it's a really interesting project to do, and that's really helped us actually push our YouTube channel, because a part of that's what allowed us to acquire the high-end cameras and the filming equipment that we've got now. So yeah, we do enjoy making the videos that we've got on there. We've got plenty of interviews. We've also got things with our volunteers, just sitting down and doing a teardown of an old machine and chatting about it, and so there's plenty of stuff on there. Yeah.
So what's a typical day like for you?
Typical day for me, well, I suppose I imagine if there's a school group coming in, we'll be coming in the morning, setting up the right machines for them, getting out all the tables and chairs for them to have their lunches. There's lots of mundane stuff as well. But then, when a school group comes in, we'll do guided tours with them. So I'll take them through the history of computing, from valve-based computers in the 40s and 50s, all the way up to the smartphone revolution and the future and where things might go. or if it's a weekend, then it's a case of dealing with all the visitors that we have coming on the front desk, and then diving into the archive to try and write some more documentation. We're trying to improve all the procedures that we're doing with our collection to meet national standards. It's a big challenge for any new young museum like ourselves, but that's a big project that we've got at the moment. So yeah, there's lots of different things going on, but yeah, it's never a dull day really. There's always something new. There's always a different person to talk to coming into the museum.
I imagine as well, when you're really interested in it, the hours must just disappear. Do you put a lot of extra time in you guys there, I imagine?
We do, yeah. I mean, the people I can't praise enough, really, the volunteers. We have, I think I mentioned a bit earlier on, we have retro gaming nights and family gaming nights where we're opening late. And we do all sorts of other evening events too. And you'll often find that our volunteers are working at the museum on a Saturday from 10 till midnight. That's 10 a.m. to midnight, running our events. And they're not there to play on the games all the time and have a bit of a laugh, although we do have a great laugh. They come along to repair stuff, to lift all the stuff, to take it back and forth from our archive, to man the cafe, to explain all of these machines to our visitors. So yeah, we really can't praise them enough. It's what any young museum has to do to get off the ground. There are so many volunteer-run museums out there, but yeah, I have to say that our guys are fantastic. The people that we have volunteering for us, they do such a good job.
Well, you mentioned about the night you did with Ashens, where it was, terrible old games. I mean, are there any kind of unloved or less popular systems that you're a fan of? We did a special on the Atari Jaguar the other week. I mean, which I think some of them kind of unfairly get, a bad reputation sometimes.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? The Jaguar. It's always fun when we do tours around that sort of area of the museum. You look at all these nice ergonomic controllers that we've got today, and then you go back to something like the Jaguar and wonder how it ever got past any sort of QA department. It's amazing, really. But yeah, we tend to try and have the systems out there that visitors will be most able to use. So we don't have things out there that are too obscure, but it is fun going up into the archive and getting out some of the lesser known stuff and stuff that really wasn't a commercial success in its time. But it's amazing how many systems there are out there that were really interesting pieces of technology, perhaps ahead of their time in many ways, but that never caught on, that never had that commercial success. I mean, the Virtual Boy is a case in point, really. You'll get people saying, oh, they'll have just heard about it and assume that it can't have been a very good machine. But then you sit down in front of it, and it's actually a really interesting experience to play on one of those things, especially considering the technology of the time. So yeah, it is really good fun to get out the things that people have often thought are a bit rubbish, not very good, like the Jaguar that you mentioned, and to kind of show them that no, these things they do have plenty of redeeming features.
Yeah, because I mean, for me, I kind of collected the main systems, your Mega Drive, Super Nintendo, but then, I got quite interested in stuff like, the CDI and the 3DO, and got, kind of bought those systems as well. And again, I mean, I think for me, it's quite a tragedy, because you imagine there was teams who went into work every single day to build these projects, and then they kind of got released and they didn't meet expectations. So there's kind of that story behind it as well that must be quite interesting to explore.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the ones I remember quite well is the Jupiter Ace has a really fun story behind it. The fact that it's so valuable these days, this little microcomputer. It's one of the sort of most desired micros of that era, really, by collectors. But in terms of its success at the time, it crashed and burned, really, because even though it was a very interesting little machine, it came with a programming language that nobody used. So yeah, it's really interesting pulling those stories out and thinking about, I mean, I mentioned before, we try not just to cover the technological development, but there's also the social development of computing. And part of that is this kind of life that a lot of people who are in that business have gotten used to, which is you work for a startup, you see whether it succeeds. Quite a lot of the time it won't do. You move on to another startup and see how that goes. That's a way of life, really, that's become quite common in the computing world. So it's interesting to explore those social stories as well.
It's very interesting that you mentioned kind of old machines, not, people thinking that they were rubbish and they didn't actually do a good job. I found that a lot of the old VR and stuff doesn't make me feel sick, but the modern stuff really does. So,
Yeah. No, it's definitely true.
Why do you think retro gaming and computing's kind of become so popular in recent years?
Well, obviously a major part of it is down to the fact that that's people's childhood. That's what they grew up with. It's an ingrained part of the way they are. So there's something about sitting down in front of one of these old systems and letting the memories come back. But that doesn't quite explain why it's kicked on in such a big way in recent years, or why people we get, for instance, teenagers who have started retro collections. It's not from their childhood stuff from the 80s and 90s. It's stuff from before they were born. Why are they getting interested in it? And it is interesting seeing those stories, seeing why people get fascinated by these things. But I think it's part of a kind of broader idea of the fact that computing is getting to that point now where, or home computing at least, where it's not new anymore. It is still, in historical terms, a very, very recent development. Home computing only kicks in really in the late 70s and the 80s. But now it's getting to the point where the medium is, take from gaming, for example. The gaming has now gotten to the point where retro style graphics are no longer seen as something of the past. It's seen as a legitimate choice, an art choice for your game. So I think the medium's now gotten old enough for us to look back fondly and with nostalgia, but also critically as well, and to really see what lessons we can take from these objects from the past. So I think that might be one reason why retro computing has become even more popular in recent years. But so much of it is still just down to nostalgia. I often say when people come to the museum, we're half about education and teaching people about the past, just like any museum, but also half of it is nostalgia as well, just coming in and seeing the things from your childhood up and running again.
Yeah, I was reading like an article the other day about retro gaming, and a developer was talking about how when he shows like the old games, and it's probably the same with music as well. Like if you go to a concert and like an old song comes on, all the audience applaud, but they're not really applauding the song; they're applauding a younger version of themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just a nostalgia kick, really, isn't it? Yeah, I see that so many times. We get people who come in and they'll request certain games from our archive. And there's something interesting about seeing them play it, because a lot of the time they'll absolutely love playing with it. But also you do get from a lot of people the sense that, okay, 20 years on, it's still great, but it's not the most amazing thing ever anymore. It's still fantastic, but it's a firm part of my childhood. And now there are other interesting new things. So, but yeah, there's an awful lot of nostalgia to it. Yeah.
What depresses me as well when I play old games from when I was a kid is like, I used to be able to complete them in like an afternoon, and now I can't even get past the first level.
Difficulty factor, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I remember sitting down for 10-hour sessions to finish the latest game. But yeah, there's just no time for that anymore.
Well, what do you think of modern retro developments like the Spectrum Next?
Oh, well, I suppose the one that's done most successfully in the last few years is the NES Mini. I think that's probably the way to do it, really. But Nintendo are very well placed to do that. Very well established company with very good management of their back catalogue. Doing it for 80s micros is, as we've seen with the various Spectrum projects that have been going on, is a pretty difficult thing to do. So I think, in principle, if you could get a product like that up and running and with a vast collection of games on it, it would be a fantastic thing to have. It's just that the industry at that time was so varied. There's so many copyright issues, and the whole industry was kind of flying by the seat of its pants at that time. So it's no wonder that resurrecting things in a full and complete way is a difficult thing to do. So yeah, I'd love to see products like that really did bring back the experience, but it is difficult to get them off the ground, as we've seen.
I've watched YouTube, and like a friend of our show, Nostalgia Nerd Peter, I know he was one of the few people who've been lucky enough to get into your secret upstairs and backroom areas. I mean, Have you got much in the collection that's not on display then?
There's an awful lot that's not on display, yes. I think probably about 5% of the collection is on display.
Wow.
Vast amounts in the background, yeah. So, yeah, in our upstairs archive, which some people have been to, yeah, we've got I think it's something like nearly 200 boxes of software now. And in that probably amounts to about 8,000 or 9,000 games. I think there's several thousand magazines, several thousand books. In terms of pure computer hardware, we've cleared 1,000 there. And that includes everything from a Spectrum to giant mainframe unit, or even something like the mega processor. So yeah, there's an awful lot that we could display if we had both the manpower and the space to put it out. Give us 10 or 20 years, we'll be in a much bigger premises and we'll have an awful lot more on display.
Be like an aircraft hangar or something.
Yeah, that'll do.
Are there kind of any dream systems or software you want to get your hands on?
Well, the one we always joke about is an Apple one. If anybody listening has a few £100,000 to donate to the museum, then we'll go out and hunt one down.
I saw one sold recently for an astonishing amount.
Yeah, it's routinely hundreds of thousands of dollars for one of those. It doesn't really matter even what condition it's in. But they have. It's not so much the machine you're buying; you're buying the origins of the cult of Apple. They've gotten such big brand following these days that to have that machine is an extraordinary thing. So yeah, we'd love to have something like that. But more realistically, it's prototype devices are always interesting. Having this kind of unofficial prototype of the BBC Micro is a really amazing thing to have. But yeah, it's the stuff that even surprises us actually that we're more interested in. It's quite hard to say specifically what our dream machines would be, because we've got a great collection to tell the stories of home computing at the moment. It's those things like the analog computer from the Bomber or various other machines of its type, things that will get offered to us in an email and we'll think, we didn't even know that existed. That's extraordinary. Yes, please, we'd love to have it. So we don't know what it is we're most after. That might be what I'm saying here.
Well, speaking of stuff you've got now, I mean, for you personally, is there like one machine or like one area of the museum you walk past and you always have to sit down and have a go, and you're like, any kind of favourite bits?
The first computers I really used was Acorns of the mid-90s. So I remember one of the first machines that we had at home was an Acorn Archimedes. So whenever I remember walking past that the other day, whilst I was just doing the rounds in our gallery, and someone had a game on there that just tripped a switch in my head, and I was looking at it going, what game is that they're playing? And it was a game called Mad Professor Mariarty. For some reason, I don't know why, I can't remember that much about the game, but it was one of the ones that I played with my brother and sister an awful lot when I was a kid, and just something about seeing the graphics there just brought it all straight back. Often when you're working at the museum, or as a fan, when you're working in any museum, sometimes the kind of fascination and the magic of the objects can wear off a little bit when you see them day in, day out. But it's great to have a moment like that where it all just comes back again. You realise, this is what a visitor thinks when they come in here for the first time. They're going to get these nostalgic kicks from it, but then also that they can go and learn about various other things too. Yeah, so I've definitely had that experience.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the Archimedes there as well, because I installed, you can get RISC OS on the Raspberry Pi now, can't you? And rediscovering that, and it was all like, middle mouse clicks on RISC OS. It was like, I had to retrain my mind a lot to use that.
Yeah, but it's interesting just how quickly it comes back to you.
Yeah.
You have to spend some time rethinking it, but very quickly the brain just slips back into the old ways of doing things and it becomes like second nature again.
Have you kind of had to pick the area that you're going to be in, like 8-bit and kind of to the 60s? Because lots of older museums, like the London Science Museum, has the Babbage engine, and there's the Colossal at Bletchley Park. So would you go further back?
Our interest has always been in personal computing. That's been where we've staked our claim as the museum to come and experience that side of the technology. Again, because we've tried to have so much stuff up and working, that naturally lends itself to home computing because it's easier to get those machines up and running. But we do have ambitions to broaden out, to look much further into the past, and to try and be involved in research for the future as well. So we do have these machines going back to the 60s, now to the 40s as well with these new machines. Also, we try and tell the story of what led to computing. So we have mechanical calculators from an earlier period, and we do have display boards about early developments of computing, going right the way back to the first time the word computer is used in the English language, which is 1613, when it was used to describe a person, a job. It was an arithmetician, someone who did computing for a living. So we do have exhibits that go back in time, but we've really put our flag down in the home computing era.
Well, over the weekend I was at Revival, and I know Stuart Williams from your centre was there as well. I mean, do you guys get out to many shows and get to mingle with other organisations and
Yeah, we've done a lot of shows before. Before we got this location in Cambridge, before we had kind of a proper home for the collection, one of the main ways that the trust behind us kept things going was by doing lots of events. So we did lots of things at the Gadget Show before, Revival, we've done things there. I think one of the most fun ones we had last year was we did 3 weekends at Butlins.
Oh, wow.
They said, we're doing these big science weekends for the people who are staying here. Do you want to come along and bring a load of retro computers? And we had this huge space there to fill. And again, our fantastic volunteers took time off from work and took their weekends to go down there and set up all this stuff and spend more of it with the public, showing them the machines again. So yeah, it's really interesting seeing what opportunities come your way. Not just retro shows, we still do plenty of those and they're an absolute blast, but also these educational opportunities too. We did the roadshow with the BBC in 2015. They did Make It Digital. It was when the BBC microbit was first being pushed. And we went all around the country with them doing loads of stuff. I sat for 8 hours on a train to go up to Dundee and show off our machines up there. So yeah, it is really good seeing what sort of opportunities come your way once you get more established as a museum.
And is that kind of a nightmare, packing everything and getting it, transporting it over? Yeah,
it can be a little bit difficult. It's one thing we've definitely improved on over time. It's such an important part of what we do now that we have our very best objects in storage in our archive. We tend to have duplicates ready and stored away in flight cases so we can stick them on a van and get them out there. So yeah, it's still a big headache, but we've made it easier over the years.
Well, do you guys kind of look at like the future of computer and software preservation? Because I mean, obviously, kind of a lot of the delivery is becoming, digital now, and there's not like physical discs and tapes and that kind of thing. I mean, have you guys got like a plan for that?
It's something that at the moment, given the scale that we run on, is sadly not feasible, but I think it has to be an ambition for the future. There are many museums out there of much more well-established major museums who are getting involved in this area. The Museum of Modern Art in New York is actually now trying to collect source code from developers there. They're looking at games from a design perspective, just as you'd look at a piece of furniture from a design perspective. And they've realized that to really collect these things, it's not good enough just to take a disc or a cassette or whatever it might be. You really need that code. And that's only becoming more of an important thing these days with so much stuff being download only. And there is a swathe of games, of software, of apps on iOS or on Android now, which are almost inevitably going to disappear because there's so many of them being released. There's such a high turnover of products on these platforms that they're going to vanish into the ether. It's going to be so hard to preserve these things. So I think any museum in that area really does have to think about how they're going to preserve things digitally in the future. But there is still real importance, I think, as I mentioned earlier on, to having that physical product there, having the actual object as it was bought off a shelf. But as we've said, people often don't buy software off shelves anymore, so preserving it is a real challenge.
I suppose it's like, having a vinyl record, compared to like an MP3, isn't it? It's
yeah, absolutely. There's something very much more satisfying about having the record with all the inserts and all the artwork and all the love that's put into that item, rather than just the music put onto a download and them sent to you that way.
Yeah, and it's much easier to delete a MP3 as well than smash a vinyl.
Yeah, it becomes much more throwaway. Yeah, it's something to treasure when you have the actual object. Yeah.
Well, Jeremy, you guys are doing an amazing job, and long may it continue. Ravi and I haven't actually, criminally, we haven't made it down yet, but I think definitely we'll have to over the summer. So
yeah, go on down, and we'll definitely let you have a look up in the archive upstairs and see what you can find.
Oh, excellent! My uncle lives in Cambridge, so I'll be coming down.
Place to stay.
Yeah. Great.
well, speaking of the summer coming up, then I mean, what have you guys got planned? What exhibitions and nights and stuff you got coming up soon?
Yeah, we've got our standard retro and family gaming nights coming up in a big way. We've got lots of educational workshops for families and kids on holidays and all sorts like that. Got one of the biggest events we've got actually is in at the end of the summer in September. We're holding the Retro Computer Festival, where we're inviting anybody who's got any interesting collection of their own to come and share it. We've already got quite a few different exhibitors coming down to show off stuff at that, including the guys from the Retro Computer Museum in Leicester, who are they're a terrific little outfit doing stuff similar to what we do. They have lots of retro machines there for people to come and play on. So we're reaching out to other people in the museum and heritage world, but also just private collectors and saying, show your stuff off, get it down there, let everybody have a look at it. So it should be a really fantastic weekend, that one.
And what's your website if people want to find out more?
The website is www.computinghistory.org.uk. You can find all the information on there, and there's a What's On page on there as well. We're also on Twitter and Facebook. The Twitter handle is @ComputerMuseum. That's another way to get to us.
Fantastic. Well, Jeremy, thank you so much for talking to us. It's been so interesting.
It's been great to be on. Thanks for having me.